So my name is Maria Tucker. I'm the chairperson of the North Brookfield School Committee. Thank you very much for coming out this evening. I'm not entirely sure if we're going to have too many members of the community. It may be more of a conversation between school committee and administrators, but that's okay, because hopefully this will be the starting of a conversation. Hold on one second, because I have a list of names. So first of all, I'd like to thank our superintendent, Richard Lind, Dr. Muir from Quabbin, and if I mispronounce your name, I am sorry, Dr. Hahi from Spencer, Dr. Castigan from Quabog, Dr. Tenza from Leicester. We had a couple other people who may show up, Ms. Gardner from Palmer and Dr. Nosek from Tantascwa. We're also really happy that Damien Surratt, who is the North Brookfield Teacher Association president, was able to come tonight. And also Jane Lynch Gilbert, who is a representative for the State Massachusetts Teacher Association, also was able to come. I'm also very happy that my fellow school committee members mostly could be here. So Elizabeth Millad is going to be doing our presentation. And we also are happy that Kristen DePass is also here. And the other two, one of them is actually going to school tonight, so she couldn't make it, but Meg Cloutier may show up a little bit later. So some of you may know our story a little bit. So in January, this past January, North Brookfield School Committee had to go to the town and ask for a large sum of money. We had a situation where we needed additional funding and had to do with a student in special education. And it was a situation that was, I think, frustrating for everybody. It was frustrating for us. It was frustrating for the other people in the town and other town boards. We're very fortunate that the town did vote for it. And so we were able to go forward without having to cut a very large amount from our school budget in the middle of the school year. But it started us thinking about it. I mean, obviously, all of us in this region here are constantly cutting. There's Senator Goby in the back. And you know what? I'm very sorry. I forgot to thank Representative, and I'm going to mispronounce your name, Berthium. Perfect. Oh, perfect. I got it right. At least I got it right because I forgot you there for a second. I'm sorry. So we were talking about it, and we just, and we knew about the Promise Act. That was a potential coming up for the next state budget. Would there be more money for us? For North Brookfield and other districts in this region. As it happened, we had a budget meeting right after the town meeting to ask for this money, and Mr. Lind shared with us that the governor's budget was also released, and I believe it was an additional $20 per student for a town like ours, a district like ours, which obviously is not going to make a difference for us. So in having this conversation, what can we do, and learning about other regions of the state, in Western Mass in particular, they're really pushing really hard to include the rurality factor in the hopeful update of the foundation budget. So we decided we would try to do this. I mean, they're very active in Western Mass already, and two of us were able to go to the State House last week for the Rural Schools Day, and we're able to speak to a few representatives and senator, including Ann Goby, who gave us a lovely tour. My children really enjoyed that. Thank you so much. So we decided we would try to do that here and to start talking and start a conversation. And while I was helping Elizabeth put together the presentation, I was also helping get some readers for Community Reading Day. And so I was looking for Dr. Seuss quotes. So I found a really awesome Dr. Seuss quote, which I'm not sure how well you can see this, but it's from Horton Hears a Who, which y'all know the story pretty well. But the quote is, "We've got to make noise in greater amounts, so open your mouth, lad, for every voice counts." And there's all the Who's on a little flower, and they're all talking to Horton saying, "We are here, we are here, we are here." And it's not really an exaggeration. I've lived in Boston for 10 years. It's not an exaggeration that people who live in the greater Boston area have absolutely no idea what is west of Worcester. So it really is something I feel it's imperative for us as a region to speak up so that our children don't continue to lose out. So now I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth, who has a lot of facts and figures. She's done a wonderful job putting it together a presentation.
Well, Well, thanks. Yeah, I echo Maria in thanking all of you guys for being here. I'm Elizabeth Malad. I'm a school committee member, and I'm also a parent. My husband Ethan and I have 2 young boys. Our oldest son, Max, is enjoying a great 3rd grade year in Mrs. Mara's class. And then our younger son, Jonah, will be a kindergarten student next year in North Brookfield Elementary School. On top of being a school committee member and a parent, I'm also an educator. And I've spent the last 17 years teaching high school history in a public school district in an affluent suburb east of 495. And for me, I would say that teaching is the best possible job that I could have or I could imagine. And I work in a community that's really supportive, just like North Brookfield is. And I think that my experience of being both a teacher and a parent has led me to be doubly appreciative of the educational experience that Max has been getting here at North Brookfield. I doubly appreciate the dedication and the professionalism of his teachers, and I also am really impressed by the resourcefulness of Mr. Lind and the whole administrative team, who work so hard and come up with really great solutions in the face of a tight budget. Because what I've realized is that having a foot, so to speak, in each of these 2 different districts has allowed me to see firsthand a level of funding inequity that exists between an affluent suburban school and a more middle income, more rural school district such as our own. So I find myself feeling frustrated. I'm frustrated as a teacher on behalf of other teachers because I realize these are teachers trying to do their best to teach 21st century students without always having full access to 21st century technology. I'm frustrated on behalf of Mr. Lind because I see his vision for expanding programming, and I see that it bumps up against the realities of a budget. And I'm frustrated on behalf of my kid and other kids in the district who do not have the same access to funded educational opportunities as kids in other zip codes do. And then beyond that, I'm also frustrated for residents in general because this is an issue that affects all of us. And as a school committee member, I see firsthand what we're up against budget-wise. And that's no one's fault, but it's frustrating because I want to advocate expanded programming and the best possible education for the students in the town, but I also know we have to do so within our budget limits. So you're hearing a level of frustration, but the good news is that right now I'm also really optimistic because, as Maria was referencing, there is a movement right now statewide to bring reform to this state funding process that's really outdated and ineffectual right now. And so over the last, before a month ago, I think I was only I had a very vague knowledge about state funding and how the whole process worked in Chapter 70. And in the last month or so, I've become really interested in just teaching myself more about this topic. And so for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to try to be concise and to the point, but I'm basically going to share with you guys what I've learned myself about how state funding works, and then also about the movement to reform it, so we can hopefully walk away with a clear idea of something that we can all do to begin to help the situation. So just a quick overview. Like I said, I'm going to start off with a basic history of state funding and then move into what are the shortfalls of the current system to try to explain this frustration that so many school districts such as our own are facing right now.
Let me know if that
and why budgets are as tight as they are. And then move into talking about the movement to reform the system, look at how this specifically impacts our districts, and what we can do to help. So, history of state funding in Massachusetts, I'm going to begin in 1993. Prior to 1993, funding to Massachusetts public schools relied predominantly on local revenue, so real estate taxes. And as such, there was a huge discrepancy in funding across the state. And so what started to happen in the 1970s is a series of lower-income school districts, a group of lower-income school districts got together, and they actually started suing the state. And in 1991, there was a case that actually ruled in the favor of these school districts, and the result was this Massachusetts Education Reform Act. And a series of reforms were put in place for the purpose of forcing the state to actually realize its constitutional mandate, which it wasn't doing up until that point, and provide adequate education for all of the students in the Commonwealth. So as a result, and I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but post-1993, charter schools came to Massachusetts, for better or for worse. I mean, that's a very controversial topic, as you guys know. But charter schools were introduced to expand educational opportunities for students who lived in underperforming districts, and they also brought in MCAS for sort of an accountability piece. And then what matters to us for our purposes is they also established Chapter 70 of the State Law Code. And Chapter 70 was designed to ensure that all districts had enough funding to provide a quality education for all. And the way Chapter 70 was set up was that it was meant to be equalizing so that the state would send more money to more financially needy districts. And Chapter 70 is what we're working under currently today. And the way the formula was set up was basically that each district, the state would calculate a foundation budget for each district, which, and then all the foundation budget is it's the minimum amount of money that a district needs to spend to provide an adequate education for its students. Okay, and so the foundation budget's going to vary from district to district based on the local needs. And then the state also determines a required local contribution, and that's based on personal income in a district, real estate, property values. So the local contribution is also going to vary also from district to district. And then what happens is the state fills the gap, whatever is needed to move from the local contribution to the foundation budget, the state provides. Okay, and so the state ends up providing more funding to more financially needy districts. That's how it works, but there's actually a fourth component in which many districts choose to spend over the foundation amount to meet the needs of their students as they see fit. And I'm going to talk more about that a little later on. Yeah, I mean, we can't deny that as a result of 1993 Massachusetts Ed reform, there's been significant progress, increased accountability. However, where we are now is we're at a point when this original formula from over 25 years ago, it's out of date, and it's not kept up with the reality of the funding needs in these districts. So I'm going to talk now specifically about what those shortfalls are and why the funding formula is not working. The bottom line is the state is undercounting how much is needed. Okay, so to the tune of $2.63 billion across the state. And the two main drivers, one is healthcare, and that healthcare costs have so far exceeded what was predicted. So much so that in 2017, the amount that the state allocated to healthcare across the Commonwealth was $1.44 billion below what districts themselves were actually shouldering. Okay, that's a gap of $1,500 per student in 2017. The other driver here in the undercounting is that the foundation budget is not adequately counting and funding special education. In 2017, the special education allocation from the state to districts across the state was $1.19 billion below the actual costs. So we have a picture where in the first 10 years post-1993, Chapter 78 doubled, but since then, it's fallen off. Since 2002, when you account for inflation, state funding to education has fallen off significantly. And so what's happened is that the balance between state aid and local aid has shifted. Okay, and when you account for inflation, we're talking about, between 2002 and 2018, state funding has decreased by 7.7%. And so local districts are picking up a larger percentage of the total funding picture. So that's why we feel as if we're asking for more money just to maintain, because that has been the trend over the last 10 years. And this is at a time when, especially recently, state and national economies have been going strong. Those are all my sources. And so the reality is we're sort of back to where we are before 1993, increased inequity across the state. Because what wealthy districts are able to do is they're able to fill the gap, and even though the foundation budget undercuts what's necessary, districts with a higher tax base can just pay what they need to, okay? They can expand their programming, invest in their education, and then you've got lower and middle income districts that are forced to operate essentially with fewer staff and materials because they have certain mandated thresholds that they have to meet, and so it gets cut in other ways. Okay, so you have many districts across the state actually paying less on the regular ed target amount. And so what this oftentimes looks like is cuts to so-called like non-essential pieces of the education. Okay, cuts to art and music, cuts to elective courses, and these are all things that are, you know, as we all know, vital to the educational experience. It sometimes looks like larger class size as a result of cuts, not enough paraprofessionals. So this is a problem, and so now I'm going to talk about the efforts that are in place to try to reform the system. And what I'm going to really talk about here and now, but I'm going to go back to 2015 just for a minute because in 2015 the state had what's known as the Foundation Budget Review Commission look into this and study it officially. And this is relevant because the findings of this Foundation Budget Review Commission are the findings that are referenced in a lot of the moves to reform the system now. It was made up of an official panel of state education leaders, and they found exactly what I was just talking about. And they sort of officially found that, yes, the foundation budget is undercounting to the tune of $1 to $2 billion per year. Again, spending on employee benefits is in fact much higher than what the foundation budget presumes it to be. And special education costs are significantly higher than what the foundation budget states they should be. On top of this, one of the things that the Foundation Budget Review Commission found was that the formula did not adequately account for the costs of educating, the cost of education in districts that had a high percentage of ELL and low-income pupils. ELL stands for English Language Learners. So these are students for whom English is not the first language. And they found that English language learners and low-income students come into the school system and they have higher needs and they're more expensive to educate. And although that's recognized to some extent in the formula, not enough. And that doesn't so much apply to us here in North Brookfield and in the surrounding districts, but it is definitely a part of the larger conversation taking place across the state. And so as a result of this, they recommended in 2015 that a change be made. And since then, legislators have really been trying to come up with a solution, but they haven't actually been able to enact a change to the formula yet. Okay, so I'm going to talk about, I guess, three basic proposals. I'm going to quickly talk about the governor's proposed budget, which has gotten a fair amount of coverage in the news, because this budget would significantly increase spending on education to some extent, but the main problem with the governor's budget from the point of view of where we're sitting is that it leaves many communities behind. It's said to increase spending to education over 7 years, like close to, I think, $1 billion over 7 years, but more than half of that increase is going to just 10 cities. And 183 districts, including our own, for next year are left with a mere $20 per pupil increase, which, you know, as Mr. Lind can tell you, is nothing. So this is not a plan that would address the needs of everyone in the state. It also puts DESE, or the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, in charge of fund allocation, and there's also a piece of it that stipulates that in the case of districts that are underperforming, the state could potentially withhold funding. Okay, which is problematic in itself, because obviously underperforming schools are a result of a variety of factors, but a piece of it is this faulty funding formula, and then you punish them after the fact. Okay, so a more comprehensive plan right now exists in the Senate, and it was a bill filed in January. It's called the Promise Act, and it's called the Promise Act because the whole premise behind this is that it's time for the state to make good on what it promised to do. Right, and what it was supposed to do as a result of the 1993 reforms. And basically, you know, without getting into all the details, this calls for the state to fully fund education according to the 2015 Foundation Budget Review Commission. And it also, you know, does focus, I think, much more comprehensively on addressing the needs of high ELL and poverty districts. It's a bill that's supported by the MTA, which is the Massachusetts Teacher Association. It's the main teachers union for Massachusetts. And it's also supported by school committees across the state because of its comprehensive nature. And in fact, the MTA has launched a Fund Our Future campaign, and they're holding forums all over the state, every day practically, to raise awareness about the Promise Act and to build support for getting it passed. Their goal is they want to get it passed in May of this year. There's also a House bill, and I'm not going to say as much about it because I admittedly know less. It hasn't gotten the same degree of coverage, but it was a bill that was filed by Representative Paul Tucker, who's also now the vice chair on the House Committee of Education. And it supposedly does address many of the 2015 Foundation Budget Review Commission concerns. One of the central disagreements between the Senate plan, the House plan, and Governor Baker's budget is the extent to which, and basically how much to fund lower income districts, and even how to define like poverty levels in Massachusetts. So I think, from my understanding, is like that's much of the points of difference between these three plans. So for us, though, I want to address a sort of separate factor, which is not getting as much coverage, certainly east of here. And those are efforts to address the rural factor in education. And you may have maybe read over the summer and in the fall that last summer, a number of state senators, our own Senator Ann Goby, along with, that's pictured right there, Senator Adam Hines, who's out of Pittsfield, and a number of other state senators were able to secure, establish a rural school aid fund, and they were able to secure $1.5 million to be distributed to schools and towns that had fewer than 21 students per square mile, and also in towns that were below the per capita income. And so this $1.5 million this fall was distributed across 33 districts. Many of our neighbors saw this money this fall. North Brookfield, we were over the density limit by a bit, so we missed out on this funding this go around. However, there are continued efforts to expand the Rural School Aid Fund. Right now there's discussion, there's talk of expanding it from 1.5 million up to 9 million. And in this version of the plan, it would be $235 per pupil in districts with a higher density threshold. So in this case, I mean, if this plan were to go through as has been proposed, North Brookfield will receive an additional $143,000. Okay, and you know, you just start to think, okay, $143,000 in a small district such as our own, that's a lot of money. You know, Mr. Lynch, you could start rolling out your one-to-one Chromebook plan that you had to cut from the last budget. You could expand. You could expand your STEM program. Okay, so this is these are real concrete factors here. Now, beyond that, there's also a more permanent solution, and that is a bill that has been filed to actually revamp the formula. So the formula that I talked about, there's a bill that proposes introducing a rurality factor into the formula. And what this would mean is, when the state is figuring out how much money goes to a district, rural school districts would get special recognition because we do have unique funding needs. And this is modeled on what's known as there's a Wisconsin plan that this is modeled off of. Okay, Wisconsin that has a lot of rural school districts. This would send $400 per pupil to schools with no more than 40 pupils per square mile. Okay, and we're at just over 27, so we would qualify for that. And also districts with a per capita income of less than 115% of the mean per capita income in the state. One other thing I've got to bring up, that's a sort of a piece of this movement for rural schools, is in 2016, the Massachusetts Coalition of Rural Schools was formed in the western part of the state, and they've really been a driving force behind in getting people to pay attention to the needs of rural schools. And in fact, they organized a Rural Schools Day at the State House last week. It was on Thursday when there was a snow day in most of the area. And we got to go into the State House. It was Mr. Lind, Maria Tucker, and myself took a trip into the State House. We brought our kids with us. We got to hear from Senator Hines, who spoke to a room full of people. And we got to meet superintendents, other school committee members, other students from rural school districts across Massachusetts. Here we are. We met up with folks from Quabbin. We also got to meet people from Hampshire Regional School District, which is west of us. It's West Hampton, Southampton. We got to meet with Senator Ann Goby and talk to her. And she, as Maria mentioned, actually took us on a wonderful tour of the Senate chambers. We got to see the newly renovated Senate chambers. So it was a great day on a lot of levels. And what was really heartening and energizing was to see that this is a larger movement that's really gaining steam and momentum. And so it's really important that we all learn about it and get behind it, because this could potentially have a very positive impact on our districts. And I wanted to take a moment to also talk about how school funding affects all of us. Whether you have a student in the school or not, what's happening in so many districts is we're having to ask for increases over the previous year's budget just to maintain and avoid cuts. And as it is in so many towns, when the school budget takes up the lion's share of the town budget, this starts to feel as though it's eating into other programs, okay? And there's understandable frustration, plenty of it to go around, because there's simply not enough money to go around. And so if the state were more adequately funding the schools, as it is promised it would do, this would alleviate a lot of that. I want to talk just quickly about that foundation budget that I mentioned at the beginning. The whole theory behind the foundation budget is that that amount of money will provide an adequate education to students in a given district. So these are statistics from the DESE website and from 2016. And you'll see that even districts, North Brookfield in 2016 spent 4% over the foundation budget. That was not because we were expanding programs or adding fluff to the budget. I mean, this is a needs-based budget, okay? And then you look at our suburban counterparts, and you see that they're spending huge sums over the foundation budget, okay? And districts like Newton, Wellesley, Dover, they're spending this much over the foundation budget, obviously because they think it's necessary. They're investing in their schools. And when you start to think of the cumulative effect of this year after year after year, you see the gap widen. So what do our schools specifically stand to gain from reform? So this is the logo from the MTA's Fund Our Future campaign. And according to their findings, if the Promise Act, that's the Senate bill, if the Promise Act were to pass, take a look at the money that our school districts will gain. Okay, and of course it varies based on the size of the district and other metrics, but this amount of money every year injected into the school budget would make a big difference for a lot of districts. Again, I can think of concrete budget items that Mr. Lynn shared with us that he envisioned as being part of our budget next year that, there's just no way we can ask for that, okay? Some of those things could be realized here. Beyond the Promise Act, though, this other bill, it's not mutually exclusive. The Promise Act is a bill, and the Rural Factors bill is a separate one. I think the Promise Act does so much for many schools across the state. It's something we should get behind. But this bill addresses our needs in specific, okay? Because rural districts do have unique funding challenges. Oftentimes, we're talking about school districts that have either a declining or a static population. So when the funding formula is based on student enrollment, we miss out. Rural schools also tend to have much higher transportation costs, even regional school districts, because it's such a wider area. And so to recognize the special needs of rural school districts, this bill, SD 2292, does that, okay? And again, if that were to pass, that would bring in an additional $200,000 to North Brookfield, okay? Huge sums for a small school district, but not huge sums in the grander scheme of the state budget, really. Okay, so what we can do to help, and I want to wrap this up and sort of hand it over to our superintendents, open up the floor for questions. But, I think what's important to realize is that now's the moment. Reform is going to happen, right? Reform didn't work, there was efforts at reform last year that didn't get realized. It's going to happen this year, and we need to make sure that our rural school districts are a piece of the conversation. So, actually, I've got, Mr. Lynn, there's a handout near you. So one of the things that I put together is we've got to advocate for these two bills, and to do so, I've created a handout which lists our local legislators, but beyond that, it lists everyone that's a member of the Senate and House Joint Committee on Education. Because the first thing that has to happen, I'm pretty sure, and Senator Goby, you can correct me if I'm wrong, and Representative Berthium, but these bills have to make it through their committees. And so, as you can see on the handout that you'll be getting, I've indicated which legislators are already behind these bills. You know, some of them already have signed on to the Promise Act and the Rural Schools Act. I've also included talking points on the back, and really, I mean, I've emailed these people already. Email, call, both help. I've got talking points, you know, and you know, if you're contacting a legislator that already supports the Promise Act, thank them for doing that. Thank you, Senator Goby. And then ask them to sign on also to the Rural Schools Act. Also, thank you, Senator Goby. And I've even just put together a sample email that you have to, you might have to modify depending on which legislator you're sending it to. Okay, and if you signed in on your way in and put your email down, we can email out updates, because this is really sort of, I see this as the first phase of action. Okay, and once it gets beyond the committee, we've got to contact Ways and Means, Senate President, Speaker of the House. So thank you for listening to my piece. And like I said, I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Lind, who's really, you know, the expert on all this budget stuff. And thank you.
Well, not to use the mic, because I didn't keep. I know, I drop it and walk out, right? So welcome, thank you all for coming. There's a few people I do want to recognize, certainly the administrative team for all being here. I know it's another long day, but I really appreciate you hanging in with us. Damian Surratt, our president of the North Brookfield Teachers Association, and Sam Miskin? Yep. Is our MTA rep, who's also joined us tonight. So thank you guys for coming out on another night. We have superintendents, we have administrators, we have school committee members from other districts besides North Brookfield. Thank you guys. Sheila Orsi from our finance committee is here tonight. Thanks for coming. Couple of things. First and foremost, thanks Elizabeth for, I mean, I learned so much just from the research she did. You can tell she's a teacher. Especially a history teacher with the nice citations at the bottom. She did a great job. So when we were at the State House, one of the things that you sort of heard was, this is the year of education. All of the legislators were talking about a year of education. The iron is hot, folks. If a change is going to happen, it's going to happen this year. And the only way it will happen is if we, as the people, let our legislators know what is needed. I have no doubt that Representative Berthium and Senator Goby are going to vote to support the schools in this area and the communities in this area. But one of the other things, and Elizabeth provided you the email addresses, is getting to other legislators, getting to those folks, especially east of 495. Those are the folks that we need to really let know what is needed. And I know our legislators will be working with them. We had a great opportunity, Dr. Muir and I, along with Superintendent Bonacani, to meet with Senator Lewis, who's the new chair of the Education Committee in the Senate, along with a number of other senators, including Senator Goby. He was very interested to ask great questions. The iron is hot. So I would strongly encourage folks, this is a way to get involved. This is a way to exercise your right in a democratic society to let people know what you want and need. And this is not, as was stated, a school issue. This is a community issue. I said it at the State House, I'll say it here. I feel like I'm battling with the town departments. I feel really bad. But I feel like I have to compete with fire and police. We need this. With highway, with library, with all the different town departments. It feels terrible to feel like we in the school have to put together a presentation to convince voters to vote for us instead of them. That's horrible. That has to change. So it's time for a change. 25-year-old formula, everybody recognizes it. The issue is how to make the changes. So check out Elizabeth's slideshow. We'll be posting it on our website. If an approach fits your community, that's what I would say you should advocate for. Let me ask the superintendents to come on up. We have Dr. Muir, we have Dr. Tenza, who is back in her old stomping grounds, Dr. Hahi, Dr. Stygian. Come on up, please, because I think one of the things that we wanted to let you know is we don't want to spend a ton of time with this, is what have we lost? What have kids and the community lost out on in our programs? Because I can tell you, and I wasn't here for some of this, but I'll read you a list of positions since 2013. The elementary library closed. We had to adjust that and reorganize so that we could just open it for part-time, the elementary school library, so kids could have access to the library. High school social studies teacher eliminated. A high school PD and health teacher eliminated. 2 elementary school special educators. 2 part-time custodians. A data secretary. A high school tech and Chinese teacher. A high school math teacher. A high school health and child development teacher. A full-time custodian. A .2 high school social studies teacher. A grade 3 teacher. High school .8 health teacher. High school .2. High school .8, which adds up to 1.0. High school half-time science teacher. These are all positions lost in the last 5 years. Think about programs. Think about opportunities that kids don't have. That's just teachers. Limiting sports, limiting music, limiting drama and other opportunities for kids to explore education in areas of interest. The application of what they learn in class, what they learn in English and in math and in science. We were lucky enough this year to be able to add a STEM program back in and build a makerspace. There's a cost to that. So we have lost, and we continue to lose. And until this funding formula changes in our community, we can't fund everything. You know that. And I think it's the same for all of our superintendents, the frustration with trying to fund these things. Last thing that I'll say is, you know, the governor's budget did increase education spending. It did. And it's to those, what you hear is gateway cities. So the superintendents, how many of your districts get $20 per student? Well, get a little bit more? You get 20? Yeah. So we all get $20 in this area, increase per student, which is the legal minimum. They have to provide us with an increase, $20. Brockton got about $400 per student. Worcester, $600 per student. This is an increase. Per student increases. Pittsfield, $600. Lawrence, $700. Holyoke, $700. Fall River, $800. New Bedford, $800. Framingham, $300. That's a per student increase. I am not saying that those districts don't need. I absolutely believe they need increases. Their students are very needy. So on ours. And that's the frustrating part. To see, for a district like ours, $12,000 come in, that doesn't pay, that pays for about a quarter of a teacher on the lowest step of the salary scale. A teacher at the step 1 level makes about $45,000.
Just a clarification, this is for fiscal year 2019.
This is the governor's budget proposed, so it's obviously at the very beginning stages of the FY20 budget process.
Okay.
But those are the numbers.
Proposed.
Governor proposes increases in very few, huge increases in very few communities. And again, do they need it? Yes. My response is certainly. Our kids have every right to have a great program as anybody else in the state. And funding this way, where a small number of districts get a lion's share of the money, leads a lot of people up, leads a lot of kids up, and that's not right. So, Dr. Muir, you want to just jump in with your district and the challenges you have?
And I'm going to ask Cheryl Duval, our Director of Administrative Services, to join me because she did an interesting exercise recently with our, Cheryl did.
Bring up the mic.
Turn your back on.
Cheryl did an interesting exercise with our school committee recently at a budget meeting that we had, where she looked at what Elizabeth referenced in her presentation about the foundation formula, what the state considers our district to have for adequate funding for education. And I'm going to let her share that information with you, but it was staggering. If we were to take what the state believes we should be spending on education and apply it to our district right now, it would decimate our district. And Cheryl has those numbers. I'm going to ask her to share those with you shortly. But in our district, speaking relative to what Mr. Lin talked about, in the last 10 years, we've lost 56 positions, 66 of those, 66 positions in teaching, and overall 56 positions in over all of our positions that are in our school district. We've been fortunate in our Quabbin district that we have not had to cut many programs, but we are at the point now where if we're going to continue to try to survive with what the governor's budget is proposing, we are going to have to look at cutting programs. We've tried to be very creative. We've tried to find efficiencies every way we can, as I'm sure all of the other superintendents and school committees in the room have been doing. In our district, we're making some very difficult decisions about whether we can keep all of the schools in our communities open. And those are not conversations that we really want to have. Every school and every community deserves their own elementary school, but we're at the point where we can no longer fund those schools and provide what we call an efficient use of our funding. And so we're having very difficult conversations where communities are in danger of not having an elementary school in their community, and that just doesn't seem right on any level. It's important. Our schools are important community resources, not just for the education that they provide, but as community centers in our small communities. Those are places where community events are held, and those are the types of conversations that we're having to have because our funding formula isn't adequate. I could go on and on, but I'm not going to spend a great deal of time because I'm sure every superintendent has a similar story. And so I'm going to just have Cheryl share some information about what the Quabbin Regional School District would look like if we were to spend what the state thinks, based on the foundation formula, we should spend.
Thank you. I'm going to put some numbers to the formula that Elizabeth taught us all tonight. The foundation budget for Quabbin for FY20 is $21.5 million. Our required local contributions for our towns went up significantly to $10 million. So 1 minus 2 equals 3. Foundation budget minus the required local contribution would be our calculated Chapter 70, which would be $11.2 million. Quabbin is receiving $16.6 million in FY20, which means that our district is being held harmless by over $5 million. We are in a district that has seen declining enrollment for the last 10 years at least, and we lost over 100 students from last year's foundation enrollment to this year's foundation enrollment. Our foundation budget is a little over $10,000 per student, so in losing those 100 kids, our foundation budget was reduced by over $1 million. So that's where we're starting. So the very first number is down $1 million from last year. We're starting much, much lower than the money we need. So I put some numbers to that for our administrative team at first, and then our school committee last week. It's important for people to know, if you don't live in our world, that the foundation budget and net school spending do not include transportation or debt. Okay, so you need to know that when you're talking about this. So our budget proposal for next year is $35 million. Taking out transportation and debt, it's just over $33 million. Remembering that our foundation budget is $21.5 million, And net school spending, which is another formula that you didn't touch on there, but net school spending is your foundation budget minus your local contribution would be your calculated Chapter 70. But if you're held harmless and paid more than that, they say you have to spend the minimum that your towns are sending you plus what the state gives you in Chapter 78. So that's $5 billion more. So net school spending in our district is just shy of $30 million. So we took a look at what our district would look like if we only spent at that level. So you saw on the screen that Quabbin spends about 9% more than their net school spending amount. So we would have to cut, and you have the same number of students, so you can't cut paper, you can't cut toilet paper, you can't cut other things like that. So I just used our salary costs. We would have to cut 37% of our current staff, or $6.5 million out of our budget. If we had to spend at the foundation, the hold harmless amount, we'd have to cut $11.8 million from where we are today. And that would be 66% of our staffing. At very little, Senator Goby, wherever you are, can the legislature change the definition of foundation budget and don't call it adequate education anymore? Because it hasn't been adequate education since 1994. So that's where we would be. I'm glad that one of our selectmen are here tonight because he listens to Dr. Muir and I whine all the time. I'm glad that, Joe, you're here to listen. It's a common problem everywhere around us. So thank you.
Paul, Brett? Together, if you want, whatever you want to do. Marilyn, if you want to come, you're welcome.
Good evening. My name is Paul Hahi. I'm the superintendent of schools in Spencer. In Spencer East Brookfield Regional School District, I find in my first 7 months, I've spent a lot of time engaging the DESE financial overseer who works with us. He's probably one of the more intelligent men in all of the Commonwealth in terms of oversight, and he helps us kind of get our arms around what Chapter 70 is all about. So we have a lot of intelligent people here who clearly get this a lot better than I do. I'm good, they're just a lot better. And the gentleman who provides oversight to us literally will sit on conference calls going through every single line of every single number each month because our reports go to the commissioner for basically an approval. So we've been doing this for some time because we had an issue some years ago, probably about eight years ago, and we had to borrow the money needed that we overspent, and we've been paying that back. We are very good stewards with our dollars. We account for each penny every month in what we do. And the most recent conversation, I'll give you a snapshot related to net school spending, was your net school spending in the last 3 months has been dropping. You have a problem. What are you going to do to correct it? So that was the theme of the call, and we had to explain our actions. Basically, we went from 5 to about 3%, and our goal or objective was to get back to 4% and be able to maintain that level through the rest of this year. And we had to explain, capital items, different items that are going on. And while all this is happening, we've had a boiler at the middle school decide it doesn't really want to not leak. It wants to leak, so that was fun. And we had a host of capital issues with the weather, and little things catch us. Well, before you know it, we're right back and right as rain with regard to net school spending. And we're putting in 4 statements of interest to repair the boiler at the middle school. The end game is we're very fortunate to have state oversight working with us. But at the end of the day, it really is incumbent upon us at the local level to control our destiny and to dictate how best to provide quality education, adequate education to our children. And we put a lot of our time, energy, and resources as much as humanly possible into our classrooms with our adults. And it's not perfect. We've lost more than we've gained over the last 8 years, especially because of issues long before I arrived. But we're on the right track. We're working really hard. And I have to say that this district is like a lot of other regional school districts in Massachusetts. Spencer East Brookfield has been through a lot, but there are a lot of regional school districts in Massachusetts that have too. I'll end on this final point, not to ramble, but I was doing my entry work, and as I was doing my entry work, I came across Southern Berkshire. And the entry report that superintendent wrote back in 2011-12 was identical in its findings to the one I had just produced not a couple months ago. Basically, it spoke about closing 2 schools. Spencer East Brookfield closed 2 schools. Talked about difficulty maintaining the properties. We have difficulty at that time maintaining the properties. Everything in Southern Berkshire was a mirror image of us. And I said, maybe it's not just Spencer East Brookfield or Southern Berkshire or Gil Montague or Pioneer Valley. Pioneer Valley seems to be the one lately that gets all the attention. At some point, something has to give and it has to change. The legislators in our region are very active, and I'm extremely appreciative for that, and I probably don't say thank you enough to them. So while I have the opportunity, I'd like to thank our elected officials for all that they do on our behalf. I'm very big on working together, but I can't say that I'm depending on the state legislature to come through for us because it's a lot to ask of them. Some are more active than others, and while our elected officials are very active, others aren't so much. And it makes it even more difficult for those that are. So it really requires us to understand the importance of us in this room, the role we play, and the role that we play in advocating, but more importantly, creating our own solutions as well. So like I said, our district's been through a lot, but we've weathered it very, very well. There's an incredible amount of pride in our district, and we continue to, enjoy the victories of our students every day. And that's what it's all about, the kids, at the end of it all. So I thank you very much for this opportunity and appreciate the forum being held this evening, Rich.
Back on stage here.
There you go. Thank you. Well, in Leicester last year, we lost 2 assistant principals. I had to lay off we needed to find about $180,000 after we had laid off teachers, so we let 2 assistant principals go. And we privatized the custodial staff, which saved us another $200,000. We were over $900,000 short last year. This year, we faced over $688,000 deficit. I unfortunately am closing a school. We are combining grade 3 through 5 into both the primary school and the middle school in order to save probably 10 teaching positions, because it was either save a couple $100,000 in closing the school and on electricity and custodians and things, or else lose 17 teachers instead of 4 or 5. And the school committee, and my chair is here, will tell you that buildings don't educate kids, and we tried to save as many of the teachers as we could. It's still going to mean that we are laying teachers off, but it'll be far greater through attrition. There's maybe 2 or 3, and then 2 or 3 that we have to lay off. But it's very difficult because at this point, we can't do this every year. You will not have a viable school system left. I know that we've been in talks, I know Paul Hahi, we've talked about sharing services. Maybe we don't have a curriculum director, maybe sharing it. We've been in talks to try to do these things to help stretch our dollars. And again, one of the things they didn't say is most communities in this state, they fund the education at about 18%, I think, over net school spending. You saw the numbers, 4%, 5%, 10%. That isn't going to be, sustainable over the course of the next few years. Like all these school districts, we are having declining enrollment. We don't have the base when you talk about Chapter 70. We're losing 25 kids every year as well. So it's very difficult. And we have towns that we had a boiler go. I know Paul Hahi said that was a lot of money out of the school budget. That could be buying books and supplies for kids. So we all face these issues, and it's very difficult to sustain a high-quality education for kids. And one of the things I think is important for every town to understand is the fact that if you have a good school system, then you're going to have high-quality housing, and you're going to have, your taxes are going to be, you know, at a level where people want to come into the community and live. When we let our schools go, and the more we cut, the more we're letting them go, we just can't sustain that year after year. So it's been very difficult. Hopefully, it ends, the bleeding stops this year, and we do get some money, and we can hire some of those teachers back. But over the course of the years, we've lost probably 10 teaching positions, and we've not brought them back. So once you lose them, my school committee chair always says it, once you lose them, you don't bring them back. It takes years to bring them back. I also lost 2 years ago, curriculum director. So we have a district where we don't even have a curriculum director, which I believe is really important for a school district. And so these are things that we can't get back, you know, as the funding goes down and we have fewer kids in our district. So, thank you.
So on that positive note, misery loves company. I've been at Quabog 10 years. We lost over 30 positions in the 10 years that I've been there. I'll spare you the list. But suffice it to say that we're doing everything that we can to be creative so that we can maintain a strong education in the classroom, which is where it really counts. I don't even have a secretary. We look at administrative positions, few and far between. The curriculum directors were mentioned. We haven't had one for 6 years. We're looking at absolutely everything, and we're getting as creative as possible. We're looking at grants. I know North Brookfield's looking at grants. It's incredibly complex, but it's a simple math problem that just doesn't add up. We're all in the same boat. But the bottom line, from what I gather from today's presentation, is I thought your presentation was outstanding. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said east of 495. You look around this room, when I do budget presentations, 5, 10, maybe 15 people at best, this room is semi-packed. But how do you get that message from here to the east of 495? And the thing that you impressed upon me the most is it was the first time that I heard that story that you're a teacher in a district east of here. I think your perspective is unique, because it's one thing for all of us to talk and complain and whine and say we don't have this, we don't have that. But you've seen the other side. And I can tell you, when I go out to other school districts and I see that other side too, I see the one-to-one initiatives, I see a media specialist, I see the esports, I see all the cool things that districts do, but they do it because they have money. But Rich has the same ideas, as does every other superintendent in this room. It's not brain surgery, but you need financial resources to do that. But our problem is bigger than this room. It's east of 495. What I would like to do is, Senator Goby and Representative Berthium have been awesome. Anytime that I have an issue, I call them and you know, they'll work with me, work through it. They're always there. They support education. What I'd like to do is hear from them on how they can spread this word from here east so that others get that message. Because I truly believe, just as your presentation pointed out, your zip code should not determine your level of education. So, Representative Berthium.
Look at that, we just said it.
Yeah. Saving money.
All right, so I will say why I got into this in the first place. I was a selectman in Spencer for a number of years. Every year, it was a fight between the selectmen and the school committee, like it is here, and many other towns I represent. And what does that do? Animosity between the departments. People hate the school department hates the town. Nobody gets anywhere. So that's why I originally got into this. So I will tell you, last year it came down to the end of July with the school reform package, and the conference committee just couldn't get it done. And I think you're right, this year's the year of education. We had a meeting with Secretary Heffernan, Admin and Finance, a couple weeks ago. He went over the governor's budget briefly. All of us in the caucus, all we cared about was education, every member in there. So he agreed. He talked to Secretary Pizer. We were supposed to meet with him yesterday, but the snow, it got canceled, so I imagine it's supposed to be next week. Because we wanted to know in the governor's proposal, how does this look like over 7 years? So I know a lot of the money is going to underfunded and low-income districts and underperforming districts. But we wanted to know, what does that look like for North Brookfield or Quabbin or Spencer over that next 7 years? And we couldn't get an answer. So we were supposed to meet with Secretary Pizer. He was supposed to delineate that all out for us, but we didn't get it. So, but I do agree with you. This is the year for education. All of us out here are on board with you. You need to get to education committee members, the speaker, and the Senate president. Those are the most influential people in this, and it's going to decide what gets done this year. Senator? It is quiet.
I have a little bit of laryngitis. Bear with me a little bit. Just a couple things. This morning, I'm on the Ways and Means Committee, as Donnie is as well, and Secretary Heffernan came to speak with us today. In a couple of weeks, on March 18th, we'll be down at Bristol Community College, and that's when we'll hear from all the education folks that day, to have an idea, to be able to ask them some questions. And I did sign on to the Promise Act, but I will tell you a couple of things. Part of my reason for signing on is that we have to start somewhere, and we have to start somewhere with some conversations. I'm not necessarily convinced that it's going to be great for every school district. And in fact, until I really see it modeled out, I don't see a lot of help, to be honest with you, for many of our school districts, for some of these smaller districts. So until I really see those things modeled out, I will have a better idea on that. One thing I can tell you is that Senator Lewis, Jason Lewis is now the Senate chair, first time for education, and he'll be the chair of that. And he was great. He met with us last week to sit down, and he's very engaged. One of the things that they're talking about is that to have the hearings on all these education funding bills as soon as possible. He was hoping it would be done by sometime this month. March 21st was thrown out as a date, but I don't think that has been firmed up yet. One thing I would recommend is that once I know when that date is going to be, I'll obviously let the superintendents know. And for any questions that you're going to have, I don't expect that all of you will be able to come into Boston when that hearing is held, but you obviously have questions, and you want to have those questions answered. As far as the rural school aid, because we're opening up everything with Chapter 70, it is everything. And this is the time to talk about all these things. It's been since 1993. This is our chance this year to do it. If we don't have the conversations now, it's going to pass us by. So it has to be done, there's no question. I feel the urgency. The Senate President, Senator Spilka, the reason that she got involved in education was because she was on a school committee. That's why she ran for the House of Representatives back in 2001. That's what brought her into it. So you've got someone that absolutely is a friend of public education. So the rural school aid. What I see with that, again, that we'll be bringing that in, Jeff Wilson with the Department of Ed, he knows that this is something that Superintendent Bonaconte, who's from the western part of the state, and that many of our rural schools have been after for a long time. The declining enrollment that you are facing, no matter what happens with the current budget now, with the current formula, you're always going to be behind. There is no way to catch up. And that is what the real problem is. And so we absolutely need something done with that rural school aid formula. I was happy to work on that last year during the Senate budget. It was $1.5 million. We were hoping for at least $3 million to get a few more schools in that last year. We were able to help Quabbin, we were able to help a few other schools, but obviously if we can get it to, we'd like to see the 9 million. I don't know if it will come to that. But when you hear what the governor has proposed and for these gateway cities, when you were rattling off the 400, 600, and everybody else gets $20 a kid, that's a slap in the face. Yeah. The governor did not help us one iota with that. And I can tell you that as we go through with the House and Senate version of the budget, it's going to be a heck of a lot more than that $20 because that's not sustainable. You can't do that. Can't do that. There's also a lot of other things that are in his budget, again, that will need to be kind of fleshed out over the next few weeks. How things really will work with the charter school reimbursements. That's a real problem. It's a real problem with the charter schools. We see what it's done to, I don't know, in this district, Rich, it was about $250,000 a year for the old Sturbridge Village. What are you up to that you're losing to?
We have about 5 students that go out.
And what's that cost to?
$119,000.
$119,000. We know that with special.
It was $28,000.
Right. That's a real problem. It's a real problem. So as we're looking at some of these funding mechanisms and looking at the formulas, we also have to be looking at things like charter schools and to make sure that things are done on, not that I have anything against charter schools, but let them play by the same rules. Let them play by the same funding rules. It shouldn't come out on the backs of our kids in the systems. Absolutely not. So, it's going to be an exciting few weeks. It's going to be an exciting few months. A lot is going to happen. I do see this moving rather quickly. So it's great that you're engaged. Stay engaged. Get your questions lists ready, because I think that when we start on when the hearings come up, things are going to move quickly. Because my feeling is that the committee wants to do things in conjunction with the entire budget cycle. So that means the House budget comes out in April, the Senate budget comes out in May. They'll come to a conference committee report, and it'll be on the governor's desk by July 1st. So we're really under a very short time frame. So yes,
Senator.
Yes, Elizabeth. Oh, I'm sorry, Maria.
I think we probably have the same question, which is basically, so we come up with a question list.
Right.
Whom do we send?
Well, I know that I would like to see what you have for questions, because there are going to be those opportunities both at the public hearings and then, as I mentioned, on the Ways and Means Committee when we're meeting on March 18th down at Bristol Community College. So those will be the time.
So before March 18th,
Absolutely.
We should all
Absolutely.
questions.
Yes.
What I was going to ask is, how transparent is the process? Because I feel like last summer, there was this movement, and all of a sudden it's like, it died. It's like, what happened? Are those deliberations, how much insight do we have into what really goes on?
Well, a couple things on that. Because it did come down to kind of the last few days, and it sort of did fall apart. But leading up to that, there were a heck of a lot of meetings with lots of stakeholders throughout the state. So I do see that as a rather transparent process.
Yeah. So you would say for us going from here, so Elizabeth did this great list of people to contact on the Education Committee and the Ways and Means Committee. So if we as a region, we have our questions, should we work together as a group? Should we all have the same questions? Should we all? I mean, basically, how do we let them know we're here, and this is what we need?
Yeah, well, I think you did a good job of that Thursday. I think people know that you're here. Obviously, it does not. It never hurts to send information in and to send those emails, especially to the chairs of the committee. That's really.
So if I were to ask every superintendent to send me what you just talked about, like all,
Fleischer was the House Chair. She's well aware of the problems. Jason is becoming more aware because he's new to the Education Committee. And I don't think that, it's not that people don't understand the problem. I think more of it is how we get our arms around it and how do we fix it. Because we know that no matter what you do with this formula, not everyone's going to benefit by it. There will be people that will not be helped a whole heck of a lot. And you know, I mean, that's just kind of how it is. You know, you squeeze a tube of toothpaste and it pops out that way, right? And goes, I mean, you can't put the toothpaste back in. And it's kind of the same thing with this funding formula. Kind of squeeze it on one end and it goes out and you just can't get it back in. Does that make any sense? I don't know. Maybe not a great analogy, but does that help at all or not?
Yeah, I mean, I can understand the people on the education committee are aware of it.
Right.
I mean, the whole idea is that, you know, east of 495, I mean, they literally do not know these towns exist. So how do we let people know? We exist, we have needs, you know.
Well, the other big part of it is that certainly when we are talking with our colleagues, I mean, that's part of the job that I have, is to make sure, you know, during the budget, when we stand up there and we're advocating for rural school aid, you know, that's part of it. So, you know, part of the job is ours to make sure, you know, Donnie needs to be talking to his colleagues, you know, the same thing. And that's on us to do that. Yes?
Hi, Senator. I'm just wondering if you, both of you support the rurality factor, and I guess like that's our thing, like that, how do we get that to be the highlighted point? I think when we talk about education and funding, you're right, not everybody's going to be happy with it, but I feel like our needs are so unique and so particular, and that really sort of gets at what we need. $20 per student is in no way, shape, or form ample to really cover anything. So how do we get to the point where we make that sort of center to this discussion that's going to happen in the next month, to these committees? How do we do that succinct message?
So thanks, Ann and the Senate and Senator Hines for bringing this up last time and getting that in the budget. It helped out a few districts, not North Brookfield, but hopefully next time around. As Ann said, that's stuff we can bring to the table. We're both on Ways and Means Committee, and we can ask that question to Secretary Pizer, and I think it's 2 weeks from today or yesterday. We can certainly do that. We can certainly talk to our respective Ways and Means chairs, and when we go through the House budget, I'm sure if Kim Ferguson, she's our resident education expert in the House, on the Republican side, she's already talked about rural aid, so we can bring that forward to you. As far as the questions, if you get, like Ann said, if you get us the questions before the Ways and Means hearing, we can both ask them there. So.
That was March 18th. Right?
Yeah, 2 weeks from yesterday.
The other thing I was just going to mention, we have a rural caucus, and actually Adam Hines and I co-chair that on the Senate side. And this is going to be one of our priorities, is the school formula. In addition to that, we met last week, because there is a Rural Policy Commission, that's a statewide commission, and we met with one of the members of that commission last week, and we asked her, when she goes back to the policy, that we're asking the Policy Commission to also make that as one of their top priorities. So when they are going around and speaking, because they speak directly with the governor's office as well, so that message, so it's coming from a lot of different areas, and that's what we're really trying to do.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Jen?
Senator Goby, the Rural Policy Commission does have a meeting coming up, and I would recommend getting the questions and the concerns to them as well, and they're in the process of putting together a report that should be done within, the commission itself is not funded through the state, so all of the regional planning agencies are putting in the funding for that. But having been to several of those meetings, the declining education and the struggles have been clearly identified throughout their different listening sessions. No solutions, immediate solutions, but I would recommend reaching out absolutely to the Rural Policy Commission.
Right, one of the, Linda Dunleavy was at that last meeting, and she's on that, and that's, and thank you for the good work that you've been doing on that, Janet. Appreciate it.
So when is that meeting? You said it's
I
upcoming?
texted earlier, I haven't heard back. My staff member who actually represents Central Mass on that Rural Policy Commission, she's in Irvington, working on their master plan, so she didn't get back to me, but I do know there's a meeting coming up within the next week or so.
Okay. Did anyone else have any questions for the superintendents or for Senator and Representative?
So my thought is always reach out to people. I don't care whether they're a U.S. Senator or your representative or every senator and every representative in the government. We have an easy way to do it now through email and social media and other things. It will not, nothing will change unless we let our voices be heard. That's what it comes down to. You say, who should we talk to? Everybody. Send it to every representative, every senator. These folks are going to advocate for us, and they need our support in their advocacy. But more than anything, the more people that sort of let all of the state senators and all of the state representatives, and the governor and the Secretary of Education know what the challenges are in our area of the state and in our town, not much is going to change. Yeah, you know, I don't want to overstate this, but Brockton threatened to sue the state recently, about a year ago. They said that the state funding is so inequitable that it is causing our students to not have the same opportunities. We are considering bringing suit. And Elizabeth covered that back in 1993. The McDuffie case was out of Brockton. And it changed the funding formula for the good back then. And again, it's become outdated. Brockton has again threatened to sue the state. It's just interesting to me that Brockton's increase was one of those 10 or so cities that saw a significant increase in the governor's budget. They made some noise. We need to make some noise. That's in the end what I would recommend to everybody, whether you're a municipal, from the municipal side, from the school side, whether you're a parent, whether you're a retired person. The schools really affect so much of your community, from property values to just the kind of community you want to live in. So I would strongly recommend everybody to use that list Elizabeth and Maria provided and reach out and let people know. If they get thousands of emails, that has an impact, even if they don't represent us directly.
You had that comment?
I did get a text back. The next Rural Policy Advisory Committee meeting is next Friday afternoon in Boston.
So this upcoming Friday or the?
A week from Friday.
Okay.
I think it's the 15th.
Yes.
There's a subcommittee meeting in our offices this week.
So
Friday this week. I'm not sure which subcommittee.
You signed in.
I did.
On our sheet, so if we were to email you,
yes,
you could give us a way to contact them.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
You're welcome.
So thank you so much. I know everyone out there is very busy, and thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules to come here. Oh, go ahead, Emma. Sorry.
I'm going to about current. If the superintendents could gather around for a photo, I would greatly appreciate it.
Sorry. Before your photo session, thank you again for coming. This is really just the start. And from, you heard what the senator said is that, because I just really like that quote, we have to let people know what we need. And so it's not just us in this room, but if your friends, if you have, all of my husband's relatives live East 128, I'm going to call them all up and say, you love my kids, make their school better, help us make their school better. Everybody, we really do have to make a movement here to make a difference. So, and I also want to especially thank Elizabeth. She did an amazing job. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for coming all. Much appreciated.
Sorry, I'm good. Thanks for coming.